is just to help you understand the work that we do through the ordinance, and then answer your questions about some of the things that I know were questions for you toward the end of the report we did to council back in April. So just so you have an idea of what's in front of you, the 4-page printout is just basically some very similar information that was given to you all back in April regarding the office. We'll talk more about statistics and when we get to that piece with Todd speaking on that. Also in front of you, you have examples of all of the material that has been developed by the office that we share with the community. The rights and responsibilities card, we now have it in 3 languages. Our homecoming guide, initially put together during the dialogue on race, we updated. It's been updated now, I think, 4 times. And we do that now in collaboration with the Albemarle Charlottesville Reentry Council. We have a service animals brochure. We have our basic Human Rights Commission, Office of Human Rights brochure that just describes what the office, the basic services for the office if you are needing to file a claim of allegation of discrimination. And then the other handout, the colorful one with the hands, talks about our Human Rights Commission and who the members are and when we meet and the whole purpose of the commission. I shared this information with you because I'm initially going to talk about our outreach efforts. That's probably about 75 to 80% of what we do in terms of our connection with the community. And so we do outreach in what I think are 3 different ways. The first way we do it is with a general outreach, and that's basically the tabling when we go to just different events, whether we're usually invited as a vendor or it's just a part of a whole bevy of service providers that are invited. We're there with all of our information. The swag we have are the ink pens, not these ink pens, but the ink pens that have been incredibly popular. And so that has our name on it and our phone number for people to call us if necessary. And we answer questions. That's also the way in which our commissioners do outreach as well. They attend those events and they stand with us at tables and answer questions. And you see there the list of all the different events that we've, under number 1 for outreach and leadership, that we do. And I just want to point out one where it talks about the Best of Both Worlds Dance and Step Show and the Junior Best of Both Worlds. That's been a long-standing event that we've been connected to even through the dialogue on race. And not only do we table at that event, but we also provide a series of questions related to a topic, either current events related or something related to social justice that the youth respond to in between the acts. And that gets all kinds of wonderful feedback from the audience members who attend those events. It's always a diverse group of folks in age, in race and ethnicity in terms of their representation. And because they're there to be entertained, they also like the fact that there's this engagement opportunity in between the acts around diversity. And so I just wanted to point that out because that's one of those events where we just don't give out information. We also try to engage the audience. And we purposefully engage the youth because we want them thinking about social justice-related issues that are important to them. The second way in which we do leadership and outreach is through education and awareness. And I make that distinction because that's where we develop presentations around human and civil rights, or we collaborate with either city departments or other organizations in the community to talk about culturally based issues. And so you can see there the whole host of folks that we partner with. I would say probably right now the most important, under this particular category, the most important outreach effort that has been happening right now is the racial and ethnic history presentation that I've been doing for the past 4 years in the city, especially since we had our experience last summer. There have been numerous requests. When I first started this 4 years ago, I did that presentation maybe 2 to 3 times a year. This year alone, I've done it almost 20 times. And the year's not over with yet. And the community is interested in engagement and finding out more about Charlottesville's history, what they have not heard about either as students in school or as residents since they've moved to Charlottesville. I do this a lot with different classes at the University of Virginia because the students who come out into the community and work with our residents want to know the history and how that impacts the way they engage with the community. So, so that piece has been not only popular, but very critical to the work that our office does in the way of outreach and trying to help people understand what social justice is about and how history impacts that conversation today. And then the third way in which we do outreach is related to facilitation and leadership. And I make that distinction by the fact that we may be asked to facilitate community-wide discussions on different issues. The dialogue on race should come to mind for you all. The other ways in which we participate in a leadership capacity is for Todd and I both are through our participation on different communities. And you can see there the different communities that we are a part of. They range from the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority, especially as it relates to the Residents Services Advisory Committee, locally to statewide, being a part of and sponsoring just a couple of weeks ago the State Association for Human Rights and an all-day discussion there about different ways in which commissioners can be more responsive to folks in their community, to nationally where we're involved with Everyday Democracy and the leadership that they provide through our participation in their community-wide discussions around race. Charlottesville has been one of the cities that they've been studying and focused on for the past 8 years. And so they provide feedback every once in a while because they're checking out what we're doing and sharing that with other partners across the United States. And every once in a while when they have an opportunity for what they call a learning experience where they're bringing all these different groups together, then Charlottesville gets to talk about the kinds of things that we do with other folks from across the country. So, so that's the way in which we do outreach and leadership. And I'm going to turn it over to Ann Smith, and she's going to talk about essentially the role and responsibility of the Human Rights Commissioners.
Good evening, everyone. The role of the HRC is to identify and review policies and practices of the City of Charlottesville and its boards and commissions and other public agencies within the city, and advise those bodies of issues related to the human rights issues. Another role is to collaborate with the public and private sectors for the purpose of providing awareness, education, and guidance on methods to prevent and eliminate discrimination citywide. Another goal, assist individuals who believe they are the victim of an act of unlawful discrimination within the city. We make recommendations regarding the city's annual legislative program with an emphasis on enabling legislation that may be needed to be implemented, to implement programs and policies that will address discrimination. These statements are coming directly from the ordinance that established the Human Rights Commission and the Office of Human Rights. In addition, excuse me a second, let me get my notes. Since the first group of commissioners were appointed in November 2013, and I was in that first group, we have made 3 significant changes in the way that we fulfilled the obligations of the Human Rights Ordinance. From 2013 to 2015, we were followed ordinance responsibilities as a large group with limited guidance on addressing community concerns. From 2015 to 2018, we followed ordinance responsibilities through the creation of subcommittees.
Say why you did that.
And the reason we created subcommittees was that it was based on we looked at all of the protective classes at that time, and we felt that we needed commissioners volunteered to sit on committees that were very, very important to them for some way to, and develop ways to address some of the community concerns at that time, and even some of the current concerns as commissioners that we had at that time. The downfall with that was that because this is a volunteer, we're volunteer commissioners, these subcommittees became extremely time-consuming, and it wasn't allowing us to really participate and show our strengths in other areas if we sat on one.
Actually, we're on 2
yeah.
committees each.
Yeah, we were on 2 committees, that's right, and that was a lot for us. And then finally, in January of 2018, we eliminated subcommittees in order to better utilize limited time as a commissioner. And ad hoc committees will be created as necessary to address communities' concerns. We thought that this was, and all of us agreed that this was the best use of our time and our expertise in dealing with different concerns and situations. Ad hocs will be created as necessary to address community concerns. Commissioners have a better understanding of ordinance responsibilities and is better able to use limited expertise of commission members with specific issues. And that's just a brief overview of what we've been doing since 2013.
Or how
We've
you've
yeah.
grown, yeah. So
Yeah.
you started out one way, then through trial and error and experience, you decided to move into something else that you thought was going to work better, and then that wasn't the best way that you wanted to work, and then you realized back in January, as you said, that was the best way to...
And being part of the subcommittees, we will also, with everyone having a very busy schedule outside of commission work, it was difficult sometimes to get all members involved in committee meetings, no matter what kind of times we set and things like that. So that's why we decided that the best practice for us would be to do what we're doing right now.
So what is
And-
like the focus point right now? 'Cause-
Well, our first focus point that we addressed at the beginning of the year is that we looked at various issues that are part of the protected classes. And we did a study of the city's ADA policies. And we looked at it closely, and we realized in reading the policies that the policy was, well, it wasn't really a policy. It was called it was like was it a transition plan?
It's called a transition plan, but that is the policy.
Mhm.
And so that was the first one that they chose to tackle because of, we have one of our commission members is deaf.
Mhm.
And so she was very interested in what she thought were some important ways in which the city could perhaps re-examine its commitment to providing accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing people. And so we have, or the commissioners,
Mhm.
looked over that policy, have made some recommendations, and now we're working with the new ADA person who was just hired so that they could look at those recommendations, and then they're going to come back to the next meeting with their, what we may have missed, or what the commissioners may have missed, I should say, in not knowing what has been completed or still needs to be addressed. And then the final set of recommendations will come to you all
Right.
for your
To change our
consideration.
policy.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And so then the next set of policies that they're looking at have to do with the police department.
Right.
So the bias-based policing, the use of force, and the constitutional matters policy that looks at the rules and procedures for detentions is the part of the 3 policies that they're looking at related to the police department.
So is use of force, constitutional matters, and what was it?
Bias-based policing.
Sorry, could you remind me how many people are on the board right now?
Right now, we have 9 members,
9. What's
Yes.
the full capacity of the board?
11.
at least 11, but it's not limited to
To
11. It,
Because I think at one point I read, I had to pull up some, I said, I'm sorry, it's been a while since we've talked about this. There might have been a recommendation to go as high as 20. Did I read that somewhere?
Well, that was something that the
Because-
commissioners were considering if they had stayed with the subcommittees.
Right.
Because there was the concern that they were spread too thin.
Mhm, that's what I
And-
heard, yeah.
And so that's still not totally off the table. They want to see how they finish this year out with the process they agreed to. And if that feels like they're being productive, and they're following the expectations that are within the ordinance, then they will stick with that. Otherwise, they might want to reconsider bumping up the number and going to subcommittees.
So how is the work on the police department going?
We really just started on it, and I believe, which meeting had to be canceled because of lack of it?
That was 2 meetings ago.
2 meetings, okay.
2 meetings ago. So right now, they're still just getting it. The first policy that they're looking at is the bias-based policing, because that's the smallest, so that, the shortest. It gives them enough time to really look through the constitutional policy, because that's pretty thick, and the, what was the other policy I mentioned?
Use of force?
Use of force, yes, those are a little bit more robust. I think the bias-based policing policy is only like 3 or 4 pages.
So when you hit a snag and you can't move forward because you don't feel like you have the resources, you don't have the expertise, what do you do? Does that, because I was looking ahead and I saw that there was one thing, that there was a sense there wasn't the right expertise on the commission.
Well, and that's what Ann is gonna,
Okay.
why don't
so
we
it's
get
for-
through
Okay,
that, and then we can start to address.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you're gonna talk about the concern.
But for the ADA piece, though,
Yes.
you felt that went well and that you had the right,
Oh, yes, we actually were given the task of each one of us individually looking at that and being able to pull out what we thought may need to change.
okay.
Then we came together in at our next commission meeting, and, you know, the input, we shared all our input, and collectively, we were able to come up with what it's been, the recommendations for the
That will
change.
eventually go to them.
And I must admit personally that was a very good way of being able to do the work of the commission,
Okay.
is coming together collectively and then tweaking things where they needed to be. And I was very pleased with the product that we're going to recommend, so.
But then we'll get more into the actual review of policies in terms of the expertise
Okay.
piece that
Okay.
has been a concern, especially when we get to some that, I think there was a lot more sense of ease with the ADA policy because we have someone who's deaf on the commission who can speak to her experiences and her knowledge of how she has navigated not just federal law, but the societal norms that have impacted how much she feels like she is able to participate in the community. And I'll save my
Okay.
thoughts for that, for right
Okay.
now. You wanna-
Okay, so it is my understanding that at the,
Concerns?
that's what I'm addressing, the concerns that were, that was discussed at your April 16th city council meeting. One concern was expecting community members to become experts in order to read policies from all city departments seems unreasonable. More guidance is needed. And if I can interject, at that time, we were believing that there was going to be a person hired in the city to look at policies, and we were going to rely on that person to help us to maneuver through this policy making and making changes and things like that.
Talking about our resource, the council's?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Council's policy analyst.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I had been talking with Paige at the time,
Mhm.
and talking about how we might be able to utilize their expertise.
Mhm.
The other two ways we
Mhm.
were considering that, the assistance with review of policy for people who don't come from an experience of having done that professionally
Yeah.
was with assistance through the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And then the other possibilities through the Batten School. It would require some ongoing education of new members who would come on board. But the overall general concern was just trying to create an easy process that a layperson who is, volunteering through a council-appointed committee to look at a policy, because that is in the ordinance, that they review policy, and then provide adequate feedback on that policy. And so in my consultation with someone who has an expertise in policy, she was not aware of any kind of simple checklist that like a community member could essentially go through, and as they read the policy, the policy addresses this, it addresses that. She was not aware. I couldn't find anything. So what I was able to do was create a 10-question, I don't know how many questions there are, but a list of questions that let me hand that around, that our commission members are using when they review the policy, and that gives them a discussion point to talk about the particular policies that they are working on. And so I think what this concern should ask us all, whether it's a Human Rights Commission or some other city council appointed group, is, especially if there's an expectation that we review policy, what's the overall expectation that that should be asked of all appointed members in terms of a process to be familiar with, so that when feedback is provided, it's in a form that you all feel like it's accomplishing what you think those groups should be doing. Because reviewing policy, especially if you have to write it or change it in some way, does require having a specific knowledge, whether legally sometimes and/or topic specific, in order to be effective. These folks are coming at it from a community member perspective, and I think if that's the expectation and you all are okay with that level of expertise, then I think in just collaboration with whether it's the C&E or Baton School or any other expert that we enlist around policy, that we create a process that everyone is comfortable with and is effective for council, if that makes sense.
Just for clarification, these concerns are concerns that the Human Rights Commission has?
Correct.
Okay, not the concerns that were raised by community members during the.
No.
Okay, that's why I was getting confused.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, these are concerns from council, from our commission.
Okay.
Okay.
And some, and there was one or two that you all raised from the April 16th meeting. And so if you want to continue, Ann.
Okay. Okay, the next concern as commissioners, we need city council to do a better job of reviewing applicants to the HRC in order to ensure a strong commission. And what,
I have a
will go
couple
on and
questions about
explain that
this.
to you. All right, a lot of times, no, not a lot of times. Okay, let me rethink that and to make it as clear as possible. We have a commissioner was appointed to the commission, I believe it was maybe near the end of December or the 1st of January.
I think it was in January or February.
And somewhere, I don't remember the exact time. That person, we have never met, nor has that person attended a meeting. So that is a concern for us who are coming out and we're, trying to work hard, trying to gather new ideas and things, and this person we have not met.
We need that feedback because other commissions have this issue. After
Yeah.
3 misses, they'd let us know and we
Yeah.
can take action on that. I also have a question. You said there's 9 commissioners and there's 11 regular spaces. We just had multiple people I would have considered to be solid candidates join, but we were only asked to fill 1 position.
And
So if there's
that's-
additionally open positions, I would like us to know that because I'd like to reinvite those people back into the process because I think they'd be very valuable.
Well,
There are 3 commissioners that are going to be coming before you in names for your recommendation to remove. Because
yes.
we know that you all put them on and then you have to remove
Okay.
them. And so they
Great.
haven't been brought before you, but
I'm a little confused about what happened with this January. So if we appointed somebody, what did council do? What happened that
he apparently teaches on Thursdays out of the state.
what did council do how could we fix this problem?
Know that our meetings are on Thursdays
Thursdays.
and that you shouldn't appoint someone who can't be in town for the
But
meetings.
how are we supposed to know that they teach out of the state? They didn't put that on
Well,
their application.
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, I think that once you state to
That
them
was
as
on his
councilors
application.
that I haven't seen the application, so I can't
Okay.
answer
Well, and I
that.
know that we interview the Human Rights Commission candidates, and we point blank ask them, is there anything that's going to prevent you from doing this position? And then the onus is on the candidate to be responsible.
I don't know that we've interviewed for that, because we recently just appointed someone, then we
But
didn't,
we're supposed to interview for the
That
Human
one
Rights
we
Commission.
interviewed for.
we didn't this last round.
I-
Right?
I remember what you're talking about, and I remember us interviewing and we're asking, is there anything that would
Yeah.
stop you? And
Well,
this
I mean,
individual
point well
said no.
taken, so this is like in the future, just let us know immediately, this person's not
Right.
showing up, and we'll fill the blank.
Yeah, I don't get why we didn't.
Well, I think part of it is trying to be accommodating, and I think there were some assumptions about there being the opportunity to attend, and it hasn't happened. And so the recommendation from the commission members is to ask that you remove that person. 2 other people are being asked to be removed, one for health reasons, and another one is for personal reasons, because they just can no longer,
They're
I guess they're
asking-
resigning. I guess they're resigning.
Okay, so they're resigning,
So
that's
what's
different.
the,
They're
Yeah.
designing.
what's the regular attendance like for your commissioners at the meetings?
I would say we were probably missing at least 1, if not 2 members every meeting, and there was 1 meeting where we didn't have a quorum, so.
And what reasons, or is that because of personal reasons, health reasons, or whatnot? I mean, I know.
Some of it's related to health.
Mhm.
We have a commission member right now who is, that I was just made aware of at the beginning of the week, who's going through some health reasons, health issues. And so until she gets cleared by her physician, she's not going to be going out of her apartment anywhere.
Do you all believe, thank you, sir. Do you believe, well, I wonder, is there in some cases a lack of participation because some commissioners believe that when things come about, work is put in and then there's very little follow through, or the recommendations that may come from subcommittees is not acted out?
All right, as a commissioner, I'd like to address that question. I believe that people, if we work together and we have constructive dialogue about a situation, then we are willing to, we may have to agree to disagree on some issues. I believe that we are trying to complete things in an expeditious time. But once again, I think that we have, if I can say that we have age differences on the commission, which is usually very much important part of a situation. And we view things differently. And that's okay, as long as we know that we're working together for a common cause. And I just believe if some people think that they are not being heard, then that's another matter, that they may need to come to the people or the person who they feel is not hearing them. Because I'll be honest with you, having sat in the chair for a little over 2.5 years, because I had to step in from vice chair to chair in a situation in the early part. I listen to everyone, and I listen to their input. I hear where they're coming from. It doesn't matter what the age of a person is; it's what they have to say, and that's what I listen to. What they have to say. And and sometimes it's wise to wait on something before implementing it. It's wise to get everyone's opinion on something or their input. And when we have meetings that people are not coming for various reasons, it's only wise to give them an opportunity to speak theirs. So I don't think we're holding up anything.
Do you
I think
believe that they get their opportunity?
Excuse me?
So do you believe they get their opportunity? I mean, I've heard this from a few of your commissioners that they feel as if they say things or things get brought up and then there's nothing that happens, or there has to be a certain way in which things have to go, and if it doesn't go that way, then that's it.
I would say, Mr. Bellamy, that we listen. I listen. Now, if there are commissioners who are coming to you expressing a concern that the whole commission is not listening to them, then they need to bring that up at a commission meeting and discuss how they feel about it, and not just run to you or another council person and express that grief. You know, we're not going to always agree. And so people have to learn how to disagree and move forward. So that's what I believe about, you know, people coming to you and saying different things, that they need to talk to us about it.
Have you had
together.
any of your commissioners voice that kind of opinion to you?
I've had conversations with commissioners, and when we finished it, voicing our opinions, we agreed to disagree and move forward and do the best we can. So that's how I see that.
I'm wondering if I could change the
Sure.
the direction
Sure.
a little bit. Because it does seem like, you know, having expertise in areas of policy analysis and research is really important. And this was something that I believe came up in April as well. And I'm going to ask you, I mean, is this now an opportunity, before we get into the budget discussions, do you need an additional staff person that has the expertise to actually get data, hunt it down, analyze it, so that you then can look at that data and see what the policy implications are? And I'm just thinking, for example, if somebody was looking at the city government's hiring practices, and I know this because I had a Baton intern and she gave me some data that shows that, you know, we hire African-American candidates above our ratio of 19% in the city. So we're not disproportionate there. But what starts happening in the data is that you don't see the same level of supervisory leadership among the African-American community.
Or retention.
Or in retention. And the same data comes in about women. In fact, more women apply for jobs in city, our local government than men do, but fewer get hired, and then fewer in supervisory roles. So that's data, and I wouldn't have thought of that, and I brought it up in the past, but maybe I could just pass that on to you, but that if you had data like that, that would begin to inform you on what policies to investigate. You know, what is the recruitment policy? What is the retention policy? What is the culture that contributes one way or the other to these things? That's the kind of thing that I'm wondering, is that a missing link? And you talked about getting Baton. I also know it's really hard to get a Baton intern and to be on top of they've got a busy workload, and
Sure.
and is it time to get more professional staff that have that expertise?
I would say it's not about the data, it's about either better utilizing the staff that already exists in the different departments to come and share that data with us, because that's part of the capacity of the ordinance, is for the commission to be able to ask any department in the city for specific data. So it's not about not having access to the data. I think it's about making sure that if they're specifically being asked to review policy and examining the policy through the lens of a human and civil rights lens, then it requires having either a deeper relationship with the staff that exists in the different departments of whose policy we're examining, or we need to make sure we have the right tool so that we are responding to the right kinds of questions so that we can give you the feedback that you need. Unless you are asking, unless the council is asking the commission to look at something in a very specific way. The ordinance just says review city policy. And so they're looking at, for instance, the ADA policy, because that impacts our protected classes and activities. They will look at the police policy. I don't know that we'll tackle all of the policies that might fall under housing, but they'll have to figure out what makes sense to them, because we also don't want to replicate the work that's being done in other either city council appointed groups or groups that are that already exist in the community that are trying to look at very similar pieces of information.
So the output from this first review that you said you have completed, was there something that we can see to understand like the impact? You know, I'm just trying to get to a more,
Sure.
data-driven outcomes from this as we talk about data. So just
Right.
as an example, like what output do you have from the review that you said you already completed from the first half of the year?
Well, for instance, one of the things was, we're still working because the NDS just hired a new ADA compliance officer. And so,
Right.
once we get the feedback from the compliance officer and they come to our Human Rights Commission meeting, share with them what their current recommendations, what the status of their current recommendations will be, because they might change something. They might say, you don't need to look at this, it's already being addressed. Or, yes, you're absolutely right, we need to pay more attention to boom, boom, and boom. And so those things will then come back to you all for recommendations that, for you all to consider. Some of the things that may need to be data-driven will depend on if you think the recommendations aren't enough or you need more information. If they need to do a study, then you're talking about them taking the time because they have agreed to only meet once a month. That's,
So, but I also see that that's an opportunity then to say, if there's a bigger study that you've looked into and you realize this is more than your capacity, then that's a time for you to say, I think this is warrants additional resources, either through an outside consultant team or whatever. I mean, we do rely on you to tell us what you need in order to get what you feel is a problem that needs to be researched and dealt with, as opposed to kind of not addressing it. If that
right,
makes any sense.
and I guess before we get caught up in thinking about this is going to be their primary job as a commissioner, I think we need to get through the discussion about whether you all want the office to become a FIPA.
All right, that's
Because
the other
that's
piece,
gonna,
yeah.
that's gonna perhaps create some other responsibilities that they don't have in the way that other commissions across the state who have enforcement powers have, because they're not holding the kinds of public hearings that are involved with investigations that could also have an impact on their work. So if we become a FIPA, then that can sort of change some of their focus and responsibilities.
So keeping that in mind, then I would like to complete the concerns of the HRC. The HRC, and this is discussion among all of us, feels that the OHR does not need a civil rights attorney. The Office of Human Rights and the Human Rights Commission will add quarterly updates to council, written or in person, to address city council concern of only hearing from the office and the Human Rights Commission once a year, as it has been done in the past. We too want to make sure that the council is aware of what we're doing and within a timely manner. And then finally, recent addition of the staff to the city council agenda group will facilitate real-time responses to upcoming city council agenda items, such as if we get the agenda in a reasonable amount of time, say two months ahead, or have an idea if there's a concern of council about a human rights issue, then the commission can look at that. And when it comes up on the agenda, we'll be able to present something to you either in person or in writing.
Can you give me an example?
So,
Naming the park.
naming the park, Food Justice Network was coming before you all with a memo. They had asked for our support in that
Right.
process. Anything related to housing, for instance, that the commission could say, we support this discussion, or think you should reconsider. It has been, because now we are added to the agenda group, the email group, that gives us some idea of what you all are going to be talking about,
Okay.
then they are able to now respond in a better, more real-time, like response.
Can I ask just I know that, was there an intent for there to be more members in the commission here, or was just?
Tonight?
Yeah, it was just having you two, because I know that the weather is terrible. I'm just curious if there was,
Were they invited?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
right.
It just
And
seems
so,
like it just seems like there's so much of this discussion is about sentiment among, 9 commissioners. It'd be very helpful. A work session is kind of a big deal to do, and it seems like it'd be better if there's all this feeling for us to interact with more, to hear from more of them, because of, I don't know, I just wanted to know if they were
Yeah.
invited.
no, folks were invited, and so
Yeah.
it's just a
Okay.
matter of whether or not, I mean, I don't want to
I'm not-
go down and
I'm
give
not-
an
I'm making
excuse
no-
for everyone that, for
I just wanted-
whatever reason, who may not be here, but.
I just wanted to know.
And also, I believe that if you look at, when we're saying the number 9, that was that's now in the past. We are down to either maybe 5.
No,
No, is it 6 active members?
no, we have 7, no, I'm
Oh, because there's a couple of
Yeah,
who are
because,
resigning.
There are
right,
9 officially,
officially.
but there are 3 that are going to be,
Either resigning
Might
or being asked
resign,
to leave.
and so
Yes.
therefore you're looking at 9.
but we just added a new person, so,
See, we haven't had a commission meeting to know that.
because that was just.
Right, but
yeah,
you weren't
this
even
was just-
full at that point, so my question still is, why wouldn't you be asking for us to fill those positions? Because again, I feel like we had multiple people who I think would have been strong contributors. I'm not sure if they'll reapply again, but we only were asked to fill 1 slot.
I think at the time, that was,
But you said there's 11 spaces. I'm
right,
confused.
and we can have up to 11
Okay.
spaces, so that's in,
I'm
that's
just raising it because a consistent thing I have heard is that you're resource constrained and the history here kind of shows it, and we've tried a couple different models, and there's still not the productivity that you would want from the commission. And so I'm just trying to understand,
Right.
how do we
sure.
help provide
how do
those
we-
resources
how do
to
we-
you?
We want more product, right? So how do we help you get that? And so, and when this was, the genesis of this, when it came out of the gates, the idea again was the council was going to be hands-off. It was you as the Human Rights Commission were going to be the ones finding what and hearing what the issues were from the community. So that was originally where this came from, and that's why it was just kind of open-ended. You review policy, because the idea was, and really a lot of your outreach, which is fabulous, things would bubble up, and you would hear what the community wanted you to investigate. And that is the thing and it clearly is, you've been struggling with how do you investigate these things with a volunteer group that doesn't have the formal training of being policy research analysts. And so we're trying to say, well, okay, so with all this outreach, what do you hear? What do you need to be really investigating? And do we need to give you more resources so that you can start developing pretty much more agenda for council to address in terms of our policies, be it, because in the Place Design Task Force meeting today, we talked about having a kind of a equity impact assessment tool over development projects. And I said, well, I thought at one point Place was supposed to have a joint meeting, or there was a desire to have a joint meeting with the Human Rights Commission. And there wasn't. It's like we attempted to do that, but it didn't go anywhere. And this was a while ago. So, but that, and I'm going to be honest too, that group is not resourced as much either, although there's a lot of high degree of technical expertise on that group about the issues that they have been assigned to look at. So I just wanted to get a feel, is that what you're sensing, that you, and I asked it already, but I do feel like I want to see more things come to us, like the ADA policy change.
And when we talk resources, I think there's resources in our community that could meaningfully contribute to this, that
Yeah, I wanted.
besides from staff resources. I'm talking about like people coming from the community. This
Yeah.
is certainly a very hot topic right now, and we have a lot of energy around it at our meetings.
They would love to.
And so I thought we had 3 really qualified people looking at this when we looked at the last round of applications, and I would have easily put all 3 on there myself.
I just want to add,
Go ahead.
just a couple thoughts, which, one of which is I think that would differ just a little bit, because we don't want to sort of require make work, and say the expectation
it's
is.
like what came from the
Yeah,
community.
yeah, absolutely, right. But I heard a very compelling vision here of opining about stuff that's on our agenda, and providing a take from the human rights community as represented in the appointments to the board. And that's a terrific, deliverable to give to us, which is chiming in.
That's true, right.
When the agenda goes up, and giving us your take and seeking to let us know what that's a thing. I
Yeah.
think that developing, best practices and new policy ideas is terrific where it's warranted. I wouldn't say that just that should happen always just on its own. It depends on but in all of that, I was just going to chime in on the Batten School idea. I think that is a really good one. Like we set up this Batten Fellows program that lasted for about a year and a half, and they have a standalone program there where they get credit each semester, and you have to validate that they've worked some. We had to sort of give Whitney, and I had 4 or 5 others who we signed a form and said you worked this amount of hours, but they have somebody there who's on staff who will approve their projects, and they can help for a semester as a whole. And so you could probably get 2 graduate students to be on task to help with lots of research out there. What are other human rights commissions doing? What are best practices? What are
I thought that was
and they could go and do community engagement, because they would love to go out.
And there's the equity initiative with Dana Matthew.
Yeah.
That
I'm on that committee.
Yeah, that might be a really good partnership, at least an association of some kind.
Right. I do want to say that as a young commission, especially in comparison to the other commissions in Virginia that have enforcement power, the rest we were the youngest. Richmond just recently approved of a Human Rights Commission. They haven't seated that group yet, and they don't have staff. They just have an ordinance that a resolution for that ordinance that they just created. But for the city of Charlottesville, prior to Richmond coming on board, and prior to Charlottesville coming on board, the other commissions had been in place for as long as 25 years.
Right.
So we've got some growing pains in terms of trying to figure out exactly what is this group going to do. Because what we do here in Charlottesville is not what any other commission in Virginia does, solely. The other commissions with enforcement power only do public hearings because they have more of a focus on investigations with housing.
Should we talk about the FIPA now?
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
leading into, you know,
Mm.
the consideration
Mm.
of how they're trying to figure out what's the best way to do what you need them to do and what the community needs them to do, given their expertise and knowledge and what the ordinance says they should be doing. Virginia Beach only does education because they have no enforcement power.
Mhm.
And even their education piece is very limited. They don't do anywhere near what we're doing in terms of trying to reach out to the community. So because in the very beginning, there was this sort of ambivalence about how do we start walking this walk, walking the talk that the ordinance laid out. They were just trying to figure it out. And I say they, meaning they had some different guidance. And so once that didn't feel like that was the best fit in that process, they changed it looking at the subcommittees, hoping that that would provide more opportunity to provide you all or the community with a product. And they stretched themselves too thin because they were putting themselves on two committees because folks got excited about the option of doing something different.
And at that time, I'm sorry, were we inviting other people to the table? So if there was a specific subcommittee that there are others in the community might have an interest in? Because I think we
Yes,
allow for
there
that.
was, yes.
Okay.
The subcommittees, there were a couple of subcommittees that had created like a community committee. But again, you're talking about folks then taking the responsibility of going to additional meetings.
Right.
So then it became
Sure.
taxing for folks. And then people couldn't come to the meetings, and so then it was up to staff to make sure they were, we were there for everything to try to keep things going. Not to provide an excuse, but just to say that's how it was laid out. And so because of some of that discussion that Ann talked about with some of the commission members feeling like, maybe we need to be doing something differently because we're not as productive as we thought we were, so let's just work as one body. We don't have to worry about
Right.
4 additional meetings a month.
Right, that's
And
understandable.
so
Yeah.
that's where they are right now with trying to figure that process out. But that's only with not even looking at the hearing piece that could potentially be a part of it.
Can you
So,
just can you give me a sense for among those commissioners that are there today, how many were in the original commission? Like how many are?
2.
So, one of the things I have another question with in regards to like just productivity as a whole, and I understand that there's a large undertaking, but I think there's a couple of things that just me personally, I feel like we have to take into account. I understand that other municipalities do things differently in regards to maybe just education and so forth, but we try to pride ourselves on being different. So I think like that's something we have to bring in. Like we don't have to do what other people do, which I think you all.
And we don't. We do a combination of
Well, that was-
the outreach and
That's what I was gonna
the
say.
investigation piece. So
Yeah, I
that's how
was-
we're different. We're very, very different.
But I was going to say, I think we all can acknowledge the fact that we try to do things different.
Right.
With that being said, I think there's a litany of people within the community who are more than willing to come on and assist with some of the heavy lifting for the HRC. And what I'm trying to figure out is what's the disconnect in regards to getting so many people who, again, as Vice Mayor Hill stated, or Ms. Galvin, I can't remember who said it, but this topic alone is a very, very, very interesting one for people in our community. Yet it seems as if we can't seem to get those individuals to come to the meetings, or the participation is lacking. And I'm trying to figure out why. Is it the methods that we're using for outreach? Is it the way in which we're doing outreach? Is it maybe the stigma of the group? Or is it something that maybe council needs to help with? But how do we kind of right this ship?
Give me an example of who you think we're missing and who's interested in doing the heavy lifting.
So when we talk about, for example, just human rights in general, right?
I
Or
need you to
to
be
the
more,
top-
I need
well, I
you
was-
to be more specific.
Well, I was going to
Okay.
get there, specifically talking about the topic of racial disparities in regards to health, or even in our education system.
Mhm.
We literally just saw from an education perspective, a group of constituents go to the school board meeting and present a wide variety of data in regards to what they believe to be an equity issue and in the eyes of some, a human rights issue. My question becomes like, why can't we get some of them to participate in some of our subcommittees? When we look at individuals like, just to throw a name out, Lisa Woolfolk, the work in which she's been doing at the university, and several other, I don't know if we would want to term them activists, but just community members. They come to council meetings often talking about issues very similar that will fall under the realm of the Human Rights Commission. So how do we get them more engaged with what the HRC is doing?
Well, I think the commission addresses the issues that are within the ordinance. And when you look at the
And those
ordinance
issues are,
with, and they're on the brochures in front of you, the protected activities are housing, employment, credit, public accommodations, and private education. Those are the 5 ways in which people are doing something that our office addresses or tries to help folks address issues dealing with those particular issues.
so when we talk about, let's take one of those, housing.
Mhm.
Where's the cross connect or intersectionality between the HRC and the maybe CRHA, the Housing Authority Board, to address some of the issues that residents may have in regards to housing, for example, right? Or even we talk
sure.
about credit, right? There have been different groups, I know different nonprofit groups in the area who've tried to have credit classes and whatnot, but can we partner with or can we get them to partner with the HRC to get that information out, since those are like specific things in which the HRC has been tasked with?
Sure, and you're bringing up a couple of things. I mean, if you're talking about just outreach and trying to get information out, that offer is extended to any group that is looking for some assistance if they think our outreach is somehow different from their outreach to the community. Or if there's a particular education awareness session that they want to do and they think it's important to partner with our office, then we do that sort of thing all the time. If there is a particular issue where, taking credit for instance, where there is, because we've never had anybody come to the Office of Human Rights expressing an allegation of discrimination regarding credit, not since the office has been open. And so, so that has not been before the commission, and we've not had a community group come and express an interest. So if
I
They
think that's
can-
part of it. Like, why do we hear stuff like that, but then it doesn't come before the commission? So
Well,
is
then
it
I think
because
it would
people
be,
don't wanna, or like, what
I
is
think
it?
it would be important for folks to, if they're coming to you all, then you should say, come to the commission and express that concern.
So I've heard many things, so let me just hit on a couple. One is, seems like to me that I heard clearly from council, you'd like more proactive communication from the commissioners and the staff. And so certainly that's feedback that is well received this evening. With regard to the points Dr. Bellamy is making, I would say that it sounds a little bit to me more like the trajectory that the commission had a few years ago, and then they exhausted their resources by not bringing in enough community members, right? And so they were all joining 2 committees at a time, and they got spent, and now they said, whoo, man, let's take a break and only meet once a month, right? So I think that if the plan was to look at, here's some community issues, we need to extend not just our reach, but the resources that we're bringing to bear. And maybe there's only one or two commissioners on each of these groups, but they're recruiting community members to these topics. That would be a much more fruitful endeavor, I think, maybe for the Human Rights Commission. I think, then we'll really need to explore what the staff resource is, how many of these committee meetings can Charlene or Todd be in, because you can't only depend on the volunteer commissioners. But
right.
I do think you're making some great points, and it may be something that the commission needs to revisit, not just one topic at a time,
Right.
but revisit, let's have multiple topics, but we have to leverage the community resources. I think that the other thing that's important is, all this work is out there to be done, right? And is it the vision that it happen at the Human Rights Commission or with the Office of Human Rights? Or are there other places where that work happens, right? So we talked about the equity piece. We talked about commenting on council agendas, right? Like, I would say that as we start to look at equity and are convening people to talk about that topic, one of the changes to the council agenda memos should be that every agenda memo has an equity lens, right? In the same way that you consider budget ramifications or how it meshes with the strategic plan. And I don't know that a volunteer group is always going to be the most effective way to get that timeliness on that. You're going to need a staff person. So I think probably you need to look at what's the work that the commission's done? What's the value been? How can it be improved? And in great part, most of the value has been that it's a safe place for community members to come. They bring their issues. They mostly get referred out, right? There has not been this deep well of complaints for investigations, but the outreach effort and the education effort has been tremendous. If there's additional resources that need to come to bear in the city, whether they're in this office or somewhere else, I think if we look at other local governments, that's in the area of equity, diversity, inclusion, right? Not necessarily going deeper on investigations, but it's probably important for you to think about all the areas, including one of the questions that brought you here tonight, which is FIPA or no, right?
Yeah, like I firmly believe that we need
So
FIPA, and I
can
felt
we have
as
a
if
discussion about that? Because I'm
Right.
going to have to leave fairly soon.
I want to have that discussion. May I just say one more thing, Ms. Galvin? I think from an outreach perspective and engagement perspective, I think Ms. Green, like you put a ton of time into doing so.
Todd and
But
I,
think
yeah.
Todd, you and
And
Todd. Well, there's
Todd,
no-
he's right
Oh,
over there.
Todd. I thought you were pointing at an empty seat. I'm like,
No.
who are you pointing at? Yes, you and Todd have done. Yeah, you put a ton of work in regards to that. But I think that we do have to shift our model in regards to how we engage now. Because like, one thing I would love to see is like HRC in terms of a social media presence, or HRC in like attending different meetings, or we're engaging different groups. I'm not saying that you all aren't trying, but I think that like we have to look at this from a different model. And I know that there may be sometimes philosophical differences or even generational difference on the commission, but can we use those age differences to capitalize on different ways to capture different audiences? Because I think there's a demographic of people that we're missing.
Well, one idea, they mentioned wanting to work with the Office of Counsel's policy analyst. Well, the Office of Counsel has a community outreach coordinator, and that's Matt Murphy. There's no
Right.
reason why Matt couldn't be working with the Human Rights Commission to upgrade the social media presence. Is that,
Well, Yeah, I mean, other than the Facebook page, is that,
or just have a look at that and see where that needs to be updated.
Yeah, I mean, like we should be on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. like our presence being felt in different ways other than just like the traditional community meetings or churches. Like because there's a litany of, and actually a lot of the people who I feel like are seeking the help from the HRC, they don't necessarily attend those traditional methods. They don't use those traditional methods of communication nor attend those similar kind of meetings. So it's like, how do we engage them? Because if we use our similar methods, which I think we might have maximized, like there's a whole nother group of people that we gotta be able to bring in other ways.
Well, and I, need to hear, not right now, but need to hear more ways in which you think we're missing certain groups of people. Because when we do outreach, we're reaching out to the folks initially to try to make sure they're aware of the services we provide, because we want to make sure that we are addressing the folks who feel like they're being discriminated against in some way, or that in this other instance that Todd is about to talk more about, for instance, the housing counseling that we do. We're getting lots of people coming to our office for help trying to find a place to live. And then problem solving with them when they get turned down for some of those reasons why. They're not going back to the Haven, they're not going to DSS, they're not going to CRHA in the way that they're coming to our office for help because of the way in which we're trying to be responsive. And so if we're missing people because of some of the programming, that's one thing. If we're missing people because they're not coming to the regular meetings. The regular meetings for some people is like a city council meeting. They get to say something at the beginning and they listen to the business, and then they get to say something at the end. And some people don't find those kinds of opportunities the best use of their time. And so then we've got to figure out, if you think we're missing certain people who aren't coming to us with their concerns that we should be addressing, then we need to figure out who we're missing, and is there a different way to outreach to some of those folks that we're clearly not doing right now because they're coming to some of you all with some of the concerns.
Okay.
I'd like to also add, I didn't totally realize that we were going straight until 7 o'clock tonight. I'm gonna have to leave too at about 6.
So I think
Or 6:50 probably. So
Todd can go right into the.
Are there additional slides in here, or is that?
No, that's it.
Slides, okay.
Yeah. Do you want to come sit over here?
Yeah, Joe, if I
Or
unplug
sit
this,
at
am I
this-
gonna cause a problem? Can I just unplug this, or does that cause?
No, you can just leave it and come, oh, no, you need your computer.
Stats.
they're
Yeah, if
done.
I pull up stats, it reveals confidential stuff, so I can only see it, and so I need to take it down.
Yeah.
We don't need it for anything else, though. Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. Pull this down.
You can come sit over here, Todd, so you have a mic.
Sorry, yeah, sorry about being behind you. Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about, kind of give you a sense of what we're doing in terms of investigation. I have all the numbers about how many people come and what they come about in here if you want that stuff, but that's always available. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of what is it like to be in that office. So I'm doing primarily the person who's doing intakes on a daily basis at the office, because Charlene's doing a lot of community work, a lot of the presentations she was talking about. So I'm usually the one receiving people and have been basically since
February.
March. Well, I had
Yeah,
some training. We were
March.
doing a little bit co-intakes at the beginning while I was new on the team. But so what I can say is, I see probably, I would say 5 to 7 people coming through the door a day with lots of different concerns. Okay, so they don't neatly fit into the protected classes and activities all the time. And so what a lot of what we're doing is trying to troubleshoot with people, figure out what is the concern that you're trying to resolve and who can make that happen for you. A lot of that is referrals to the EEOC for employment concerns, and so we help people work out the intake process there and make sure they feel prepared when they go down there so that their case can be investigated. So employment is the highest number of cases that we receive. Second to that would be housing. Again, it's not necessarily housing discrimination, although we do hear a little bit about that. We try to address it when we can. But a lot of what we're hearing are people just trying to resolve landlord-tenant disputes, or just trying to navigate how do I enroll in the various affordable housing programs that are out there. Okay, so a lot of it is what we call counseling. It's just helping people navigate systems and get what they need to feel whole. Does that make sense? So with regard to formal investigations, we haven't done a single one since I've been here, and there's a couple of reasons there. One, if we talk about employment, let's just focus on employment and housing, because public accommodation, credit, and private education are pretty much nil in terms of how many people we see with regard to those issues. So just talking housing and employment alone. So housing, so if we were to investigate a fair housing complaint, we could potentially do that. The ordinance doesn't stipulate that we do that. It actually says we refer those to PHA. What we've been doing, we got some training from PHA to do what we call a housing counseling, which is resolution of conflicts, landlord-tenant conflicts, or trying to look deeper at what is the issue you bring before us and what resources do you need to get it resolved. So we've offered mediation to a couple of folks who have come with some landlord-tenant disputes. Neither one of those has been accepted by the other party, so that never went beyond that, although they're still pursuing these things and kind of coming to us for advice on how they want to proceed next. So nobody has raised a concern to the level where they want to do a fair housing discrimination complaint, which we can do that with people, but we would probably refer that out to the Virginia Fair Housing Office in Richmond based on what the ordinance currently says. Does that make sense? So that's how we can work with fair housing discrimination complaints. With regard to employment, we're limited, as you know by the ordinance, to employers within the city by geography, and between 6 and 14 employees, and only if they've been terminated. And part of that, I believe, is Virginia law as well, limits our ability to investigate any larger employment complaints. If we were to do that, that's where the FEPA designation comes in. So that's a Fair Employment Practices Agency, which is a referral partnership with the EEOC. And in our case, that's the EEOC field office in Richmond. So we can talk more about what that would look like or why that would make sense, or you can have.
You said 6 to 14?
6 to 14 employees.
So that's
Yeah.
the state's designation for a small business. And it, larger than 14 is a large business.
I can set more of the stage for that if you want to talk about that, or if you want to ask questions first. Let you lead, because I know your time is limited.
And so what was where is the information that tells us that a FEPA is needed?
It's a great question. So what are the, I guess, talk about what the advantages are of having a FEPA. So one, you can investigate employers within the city of any size, right, in terms of number of employees, and it doesn't necessarily revolve around cases of termination only, right? We could look at other aspects of discrimination in the workplace. So that means we wouldn't have to send people to Richmond to get that addressed. Two, by addressing things locally, we can give people more personalized attention. So say we refer something to the EEOC, so they have 180 days to process that claim before they issue a right to sue letter, right? We could potentially turn that around faster for people. We could give people a little bit more personalized attention in that regard. So that's an advantage. A minimal advantage would be we get reimbursed for every case that we brought to closure.
It has to be closed.
But it has to be all the way closed, right? So it's a big process to run a full investigation and close a case. But
do you have statistics when you were saying that 5 to 7 a day are coming in with
yeah,
questions? Is that
Those are contacts.
yeah.
Those are just so 5 to 7 people are coming to the office asking questions. Not all of them are about complaints. They
Yeah,
are.
no, but do you keep data on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That'd be. I mean, I think it'd be interesting because I guess my question all the way along has been with the models that are brought to us, I mean, this is a great example of, we're a 50,000 person city. So a lot of the time, we're looking to do programs which have great motivations underneath them. And the question is just, can they be sized to a smaller city? So Fairfax
Yeah.
County has 1 million people.
Right.
And, and like Austin was brought up recently as an example for the housing.
The policy work.
And Austin has,
350.
yeah, 350,000, yeah, it's like 10 times our size. I thought it was more,
That's
but
kinda more than that.
whatever,
It's
so,
more than that.
so, yeah, that was, so, and that's just what I'm wanting to understand a lot of the
Yeah.
time, is what's could we get, or is maybe, maybe we want to share the office with another jurisdiction, or that could make it make sense.
And I had a
You
question
don't
around
want somebody
that.
sitting there,
Okay.
not having enough to do.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily not having enough to do. It's what other responsibilities are you, is expected of the office? Because it wouldn't be just investigating employment.
Right.
Because we still have the responsibility to investigate public accommodation if brought before us. We don't get a bunch of those, but, they can be time intensive. An investigator can handle about 3 investigations, a month at one time?
Simultaneous.
Simultaneously, in terms of trying to make sure you get the work done. And so we want to make sure we stay within that, with having both of us potentially as investigators, then you're talking about, possibly 6 investigations a month. But because that would be primarily what Todd would do, if I were to have to take on doing that many, that means something else goes down in the way of outreach. And so we would just have to make some choices. What's more important in terms of the work of the office and how we try to do what we do? But I keep talking, Todd, in terms of.
Yeah, and so when we talk about comparable cities, so the unique thing about where we're at, so EEOC, that would be the referral agencies for us for employment cases, their jurisdiction isn't by state, it's by region, which is kind of unusual. So in our region, we're in Richmond EEOC's, that's our field office. In that region, there are currently no offices that have a FIPA. And so if we did this, we'd be the first in that region. So I was talking today with Darren Calhoun, who's the director down there, and for them to figure out which cases to send our way is actually, we'd have to sit down with them and figure that out, because they don't break up cases by like municipality jurisdiction. They don't look at the zip code. They just have to somehow figure out which ones are within are covered by our ordinance, and then check in with us, like, can you investigate this one or not, and then decide whether or not we can take it on as a referral. So to get a sense of how many cases they would be referring to us on an annual basis, they can't give us that right now. Right now, we had, and the problem right now is I can't get on to look at the spreadsheet because we're off Triton, but we saw 7, I think it's 7 cases so far that occurred in Charlottesville that we had to refer to EEOC this year so far. So whether or not that justifies being a FIPA, maybe not. Looking at what would that cost us in terms of, would the city have to hire staff for us to take on all 7 of those investigations in the year? I don't know, because we haven't run one to see what it takes to make that happen. How many more would come from EEOC if we were a FIPA? Don't know.
We don't know.
Because they can't tell us. I've FOIA'd the EEOC, the federal EEOC, to see what kind of data I can get for the state and the county, to see if they can break it up or if they do any breaking up at that level, but I haven't gotten a response yet for that. So.
And how much do they reimburse you if you come to closure?
It's
about
minimal.
700, maybe 750
Yeah.
per closed case.
And so I've also called around, so keeping in mind that we're limited in our ability to investigate also by state law, right? Until we partner with, from what I understand, partner with the EEOC as a referral agency, even if we change the ordinance to say, well, we can investigate any size employer within the city, we still couldn't do that based on state law, because that would be a Dillon rule violation, as I understand it.
We would have to
So
be.
there's-
Right. Yeah.
So just to try to clarify and understand a little more, so there's two separate questions. There's, do you become a FIPA, which is a administrative legal question, and then there's the resources thing for us, which is, do you create another staff person? Do you set up the office differently? Is that right?
Well, I mean,
Right.
we can't say what the workload is going to look like because we can't get specific numbers
Right.
from the Richmond office to sort of gauge and keep at a certain range with the staff that we currently have.
But you could, but you could become a FIPA without having to do the extra staff person and
Yep.
make a decision after 6 months.
Right,
and
after you've had
see-
experience
and
doing
have-
it.
I mean, I
See
remember,
what
I heard,
That's one way we thought
I
about
can't
it.
remember who it was who suggested that you could have an outside, like you could have legal aid on a contract basis,
Yeah.
do it until you would know, kind of did it merit, an FTE and an expansion
That
of the
was
office.
just
and-
as investigators.
But they don't
Right.
do investigation.
Yeah, and so since they don't do investigations,
They do
they wouldn't
litigation.
be a group.
They don't do it, okay.
I think that's the difference. Like,
Yeah.
to understand how the process works, like if you do employment law, like legal aid could take a case on the litigation end, but they can't, they rely on EEOC to do the initial intake and investigation and issue the right to sue letter, so that's why they often have to sit on their hands for 180 days, because they send it to EEOC maybe has a backlog because they're on the state.
So this would help the
Yeah.
EOCs with his backlog.
Yeah, I guess
Potentially, if it's within
Yeah.
our jurisdiction. That's
Yeah.
that's the trick, is we don't know how many cases they're getting within our jurisdiction.
Just speaking for myself, given I came in after this was all done, but my concern would be just, on this theme, would be making sure that we didn't do an allocation, and given the concerns that people have had about the number of complaints, given the initial debate and the mission and so on, it seems to me like you could do the FIPA, but then you wouldn't necessarily, you all could have somebody investigating, but on a contract basis until you figure it out, did it justify a full-time position? Maybe it
It's true.
would be a half-time position, maybe you could
Right, you could agree to
manage it
do
somewhere
it.
else. And I just would view those two things separately,
And-
because you could grow into the,
Because you can refuse to take on a case.
Well, so that's the interesting thing about FIPA. You want to answer this?
Yeah, go ahead. No, go
One of the
ahead.
things about FIPA is when you apply for it, you have to demonstrate your ability to take the cases that could potentially be referred to you.
Oh, okay.
Without knowing what that workload is, we
Hmm.
would say, well, we've got 2 staff that are trained in investigative skills. Is that enough? And we send that off to EEOC, and they go, let's see what you've got here.
Well, they
And
may
then
not even say.
they
that
could
you can do
decline
it.
our application.
Yeah.
So it's not so much, they're
Huh.
not looking at how many staff you have, they're looking at your ability to deal with the referrals that they give. And so it's not so much they're expecting like a certain quota, like we want you to process this many cases. They're saying, if this many cases are referred to you, can you handle them? And
what does trained as an investigator mean?
You
it's
go through the EEOC training.
EEOC training.
And what is that?
It's a
like
week-long,
A week, so, okay,
Course.
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's not
I
a
didn't know that.
huge commitment of training, but,
Huh.
and then follow-up, you have to do follow-up training throughout the year to
Yeah.
refresh.
Is it possible to have someone like that would be a consultant? to
Yeah,
the
you can do
office?
that. They're definitely private, like, folks who do that as a private business and do investigations. So you could contract with somebody if you got in a pinch, once
So
you,
we could do that as
Yeah.
a ramp-up kind of test phase, and could we say to the EOC in the application, we have a very qualified outside consultant who's ready to go, and we feel that we can handle the
But
capacity.
you would also go through the training. You
Yeah,
would-
I've already gone through the
he's already,
training.
yeah.
No,
You
he's
were
already,
already-
they
you were
both
already
have
trained.
gone
Both
through it.
You both went through the training.
Yeah. So
Okay,
that-
that's helpful.
Yeah.
So that's a potential way to do it, because that's what we've been talking about too, is how do you start the process, then not suddenly find yourself drowning. We have to have money sort of set aside to then
Yeah.
allocate towards potentially contracting an investigator or some other administrative staff, or whatever it takes to make it happen.
However, I mean, council has appropriated dollars for mediation services for the past 5 years, and we've yet to ever spend that budget. There's never been a mediation, so, at least in part, there's probably some seed money there.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, okay.
I think it's something we should do.
We should explore.
Right, so you
I'd like
mentioned
to
the
get a-
positives, what were the concerns, Eve? What were the concerns, portions of this?
Only I think maybe just the workload
workload,
concern and making sure that we
uncertainty.
have the
It would just-
capacity
It would just
to,
elevate your capacity and your,
yep.
What are the
your
costs?
presence in this space, in
Right.
this arena.
Exactly. But you asked what the costs were, so
Yeah.
really the only
Whatever.
cost
Unless
would
there's a-
be
Yeah,
if we had to contract with an additional investigator or hire an
and
additional
we
investigator.
have money now
Yeah.
that we've been storing because we haven't been using mediation
I
services.
mean, it
Well,
goes away
not
every year.
stored.
Yeah, I
right?
know.
So
It's
nothing's
only,
stored.
I think it's only a $5,000 budget line for mediation that hasn't been used. It's been cut down from a significant amount at the very, very beginning, when it was assumed that the mediation services would be used, and so now we've kept it at a minimum of 5,000, but it has not been used yet.
Well, right now, it seems like nothing ventured, nothing gained. I mean, you just make the application to EEOC, you'd get they'd do an evaluation of our capacity, and then if they say you can do it, I guess then that would be the next thing, is making sure we've got an ability to
Can we just
cover ourselves.
clarify council's intent? Because, there are often times with a state or federal program where if you determine that you'd like to become a partner, they want you to take people from the whole region. And I would assume that you at the very least want to say, we're interested in serving the needs of the people in the 10 square miles of the city of Charlottesville. Will you send us those people? Right? It's not the intent that you use city tax dollars to all of a sudden take cases from Madison or
No,
Goochland or
that
something
is-
like that.
Or
So,
even in the county with the Charlottesville,
Because my understanding is that
Address.
we do provide services to a lot of Albemarle County residents. It's because the focus is the employer is in Charlottesville city limits. That's always been the issue. I mean, it's the employer location that we have
right.
That's true.
Wouldn't
a
be that
city-
hard.
constraint on.
I mean, you should be able to find out by somebody's address whether they're in the city or the county.
But a city resident who works for a county company would not.
No, that's
Would
always
not.
been the dilemma of the ordinance, right?
Yeah.
And this, this isn't applicable to city residents.
Right.
It's applicable to
City
employers in the
employers.
city of
Yeah, that's
Charlottesville.
interesting. huh.
Yeah.
No, that's why it's been
That's the
a
trick.
So when
a
you move over the
challenging
dotted line, Mike, along.
problem.
So would it be possible to approach?
in the same way that
Albemarle
if
County
somebody
about-
from Fluvanna County broke the law in the downtown mall, it doesn't matter where their residence is, it
Right.
would be a Charlottesville
Right.
crime. And so if the infraction, right, is by an
Yeah.
employer who treated somebody unfairly, the question is that employer inside the city geography?
See, and
Interesting.
that I think we need to make sure that we can have that kind of,
That's the relationship we need with the
See,
EEOC, that when they
we're doing
send
Char-
people our way,
and if,
You know,
and at
it's-
some
it's
point, if
within the
Albemarle
city.
County wants to partner with
Yeah.
us and co-fund this office, then we could open up employers in Albemarle County.
But hasn't that been asked?
No, we've asked that, but
not
never.
from,
Not overtly.
not from
No.
you all that I'm aware of.
And that you ask about concerns, and that is one of the concerns,
Yeah,
that we
'cause
do
we do
see
get
a lot of
people-
people come who are talking about from employment in the county, and we just have to refer them to the EEOC, and we still would have to do that.
So I think I'm really glad that this issue is coming up, because when we get heat or questions about why haven't you all done this, or what's this is a very specific intricacy to Virginia. You've got separate cities and counties. We're the only state in the country that does. And we are also physically nested within Albemarle County, and that makes it even more complicated because people really are mixed up, and it makes it very hard to administer this the right way. It's very different than someplace where the city is part of the county. It's very different from where the city and the county are adjoining. You can draw easy lines. That's not the case here. So this would be would be a good reason not to do it. I mean, as I'm hearing it, or it's a significant, unless the county, it's just another concern that I'm,
Well, and the
I'm
other
glad we're
thing
talking
that
about
was,
it. This is why you
that
work
was
sessions.
clarifying is that this was not about hiring discrimination. It's about firing. That's what I remember.
For the
That-
small business.
For the small business.
Termination
So
only
it's not,
that
this is
we
not
address.
even about,
No, but once we get to this, I thought if
Over
we
certain
pure
size.
But if we
FIFA-
became
but when you're a
FIFA,
FIFA, you can. Okay.
And it
well,
also
Yeah.
see, to me, that's an
So we
important
would be
distinction.
opening
Yes.
that up with
Yeah.
this, right?
So size
So
of business, products, and
theoretically-
the number of things you can.
Right, so
Report.
theoretically, we would be able to address an allegation of discrimination from any business within any employer within the city of Charlottesville, including local government, including city employees. Unless you all made a stipulation within the ordinance.
Seems interesting.
Well, one of the things the EEOC would ask any employee of a large employer is, did you already go through your administrative process, right?
That's right.
So presumably
Yeah.
these would be folks who had already exhausted the grievance process.
And we always ask that question anyways.
Yep.
We ask folks if they've gone through, because we have helped people address their grievance process with their employer.
Let me ask another, this also applies to gender, obviously, any protected class, right? So
Sexes,
if
yes.
somebody were to make a claim about gender-based discrimination, if there was a FIPA in place, they would, and it was about a Charlottesville employer, they would go to the Charlottesville office
All
rather
of
than
the
to
8 protected classes
EEOC?
would,
If we go this
Well,
route.
we would become our.
we would still be held to the Dillon rule regarding sexual orientation, transgender
Right, which
status,
are not-
and gender identity.
Right.
There are some changes that the federal government is trying to make so that any kind of discrimination falls under sex, if it happens to include transgender status or gender identity or sexual orientation. However, that's not a very clean, addressable issue in Virginia.
Over the years, have you guys had gender
I have-
inquiries
there
about
have-
gender discrimination, or?
Yes, there have
Because
been
the
a
discussion is so much about race, justified.
transgender status, yes.
But I mean, just
Yes.
sexist.
There have been a couple of people who have
discrimination.
had concerns about it being race and sex, or for some folks only about sex.
Just because in the Me Too era, there's going to be
Yes.
more attention to this around the country, I would think. And there's a lot of law about it, so.
So given the time, I'm just wondering what are some of our tangible things? I think one, we need to figure out what's the right composition of this commission, and you need to give us feedback immediately when there's something getting off the rails.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that we are resourcing this commission. And I think then as a result, we also are asking for more accountability on what you are accomplishing. I think, did I hear that a lot?
The concerns on page 3, is that where you're?
Those are concerns that they had.
Yes. I mean, did you all address?
Yes, went through those, yes.
I'll go back and look. And I apologize for being, almost missing the meeting, but the rain decided to not stay outside and to come into my house, so.
I'm sure. And then the other piece I know that we heard, and that we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but in those reports that we get annually, I really would like them to be more data-driven personally, and I'm happy to talk through that at another time with my
Yeah.
colleagues, but I just feel like seeing all the work you're doing, I just think it's so valuable for us to have some data behind it so that we can really tout that and just show like all the ways that we're reaching and all the impact that's having on those classes and the community. So that was something that was
So,
a
yeah,
theme.
even your intakes, and, just regularly updating us as to which protected class is coming in more frequently, and,
Well, we can definitely do that piece of it regarding the individual issues of discrimination. And I think with the commission trying to address systemic issues in terms of what data they might be using, if they're using any, if it's not just community members coming before them and saying, we have this concern, we can certainly address it in that way. I think with regards to the outreach piece, when you're talking about the impact, I would like some more specific guidance in terms of not just numbers of people that come to our events. We are trying to be more purposeful with evaluations after our events that we actually design and create, and not always just as a collaborative partner on some things. So we'll hopefully be able to provide some more meaningful feedback in that way. But if there is something very specific that you want regarding data, I would like for your, to have your input on that as soon as you have had an opportunity to talk more about it.
And then I guess third, we now have to decide what direction are we giving them regarding the FIPA decision? Or do they, and that'll obviously have to come in front of council more formally
Well,
for a vote?
for a vote. I mean, I think the work session, we are talking and exploring
Right.
and getting it all out, but I think it does need to come formally before council for a vote, because it would be changing the ordinance. It would be an amendment to the ordinance.
It would be an amendment to the ordinance and potentially an amendment to the responsibilities of the commissioners, because again, as I had mentioned
Right,
before,
of course.
now they're gonna have the potential responsibility of doing hearings. They might be pre-hearings. We have to figure out what that process exactly is gonna look like that is different from what it is right now. And that might, we'll have all those.
Well, before we get this
potential
group any
data.
more responsibility, I want to make sure we have a group that's
Maybe we, maybe we
functioning.
could each go down and just say if we have any, on that particular thing, do we have any thought, or we could have
A group that's functioning.
yeah,
How
On
many
that FIPA
commissioners are
question.
current
Oh, that was a whole
concerned?
discussion.
9
There's
that
9,
are
but there's 3 that
officially,
are anticipating are either going to resign or be asked to resign.
and 1 was just added, so technically we'll have 7. Once 3 leave, and the new one that you all just appointed is added. Or she's been added, she just hasn't, we haven't had a meeting yet for her to attend.
So there are 3 who are.
Either resigning or being asked to leave.
And I just raised it. We had other applicants that I thought were strong. We can certainly hopefully reconsider.
And I'd just like to say, because when this first came out, there was, as I understood it, there was a physical presence every month by a representative from the EEOC that would come to Charlottesville. And that was how we got around the whole idea of not being a FIPA. Because it was the physical presence of EEOC was here once a month. And I'm not sure what happened to that, but
They didn't have the numbers to justify them having a staff person come to Charlottesville once a month, and so they stopped coming.
So that, probably that same question they would ask themselves about us becoming a FIPA. If we put the constraint on it being only Charlottesville employers, right? So they would have to make that call whether or not this is going to be viable as a FIPA
Yeah.
for the same reason.
Yep.
So, but to me, I've been hearing from the community that they wanted that presence, that EEOC presence in the city, and they have been missing it. That's what I've been hearing. So and when that arrangement ended, we didn't replace it, and it wasn't clear, or what we to the community why it ended. I am very interested in exploring becoming a FIPA so that we could get back that EEOC presence here in Charlottesville, because it's more convenient. But again, they have to decide whether or not this is going to be worth it to them.
That's right.
And it's a possibility it may not be, because at one point they decided it wasn't worth their time to come here once a month.
So what is their physical presence if we go this direction? Because I thought we were that was the whole point, was that we're taking on this responsibility and no longer asking them to.
They wouldn't have to come here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
No.
Okay, alternative.
That's just it. I
Would
mean,
they have to justify
So
that?
they wouldn't have to come here.
They need to evaluate our application, our
Yeah.
request to become a FIFA. And I think Ms. Galvin was just saying,
Maybe
part of
denied.
their analysis is, when we used to go down there, nobody came out, do we really need to approve these folks to
I
do
see.
it? But, yeah, I think you all, would like to see these guys come to a future council meeting, ask, maybe tell you a little bit more about the application process
Have an
itself.
EEOC person come?
Um,
That might be very good, to have somebody from
Well-
EEOC come.
Our application doesn't go to the Richmond
Oh,
field office. It goes to the office in Washington DC.
okay.
And so James Yao is the person, if we can get him to come, then perhaps that would be helpful, but
So the,
he's the guy that we have to apply to.
Only if, if they don't think we're big enough or would warrant it, then
so it sounds like the item that would become an agenda item for us would be, would we file an application, right? And then there's the separate resource question about what would go into that application. And just on that thing, just as an attorney, I've had some familiarity with HR law and I think the thing that is appealing is when people do file an EEOC, it's a very far off thing. I mean, it's like a federal application. And I worked on an employment discrimination case as the plaintiff against an agency a long time ago, and it would be more local. It would feel more like it was a community thing if you were going to a community about whatever the complaint was.
Well,
But
I can speak from
the-
personal experience. I wanted to file a complaint against sexual discrimination.
Really,
And when I got hit with the whole rigmarole, having to go to Richmond,
right.
it stopped me dead in my tracks.
Yeah, so that would be, right, and I think that people
It was
should,
employment, it was about wages and the whole nine
well,
yards.
there you go.
And
So,
we have, in our
but I'm
work with
concerned,
folks, in our work with folks who have had that fear, we sit down with them and go through the application process.
Right.
Since we haven't had that relationship with the EEOC coming once a month, we sit down, make sure that they have as much evidence as much as possible that they're going to be as successful in their intake in Richmond,
right,
even, if we had the ability to investigate it here. But
But I guess
there are advantages with it being local.
So just for me, that would be the major pro here. The major concern I would have, especially given even this presentation, which just adds to most of what we've heard, when I've been involved, is the volume and the size and the resources, given all the competing
Right.
ones that we have. So to me, if there was a way of addressing that as this, in the first period of this, with having a more right-sized funding arrangement to do the investigations as opposed to creating a full position, and maybe just because there's been a lot of concern about that, which has been enhanced by the way that staff talks about this a lot of time, which has been fact-based. I just, like, if there was a way of coming up with a less expensive mode of funding the investigations that then could grow if the position needed it, or maybe we just do the consulting arrangement.
We're saying right now we would kind of absorb it in the short term and just kind of see it out and know that we
Yeah.
have a consulting option on the fly if necessary, and then could
And
then
it could
make a
have a
decision
full-time
after
position
maybe
or a
a year.
half-time later on, yeah. But if
Yeah.
it never needed that, then
Then why would you
could
bother?
always just, right.
So then the technical question is, if we're just giving the commission direction to apply, we wouldn't have to change the ordinance yet. The ordinance would only change if we knew
Right.
that that was something we could do, correct?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, the first act would be formally changing our ordinance. The first act would be to give direction.
Unless, let's see, why don't we have part of the presentation be that we tell you what's in the application itself? And if
Okay.
the application says, prove that your ordinance allows you to do this,
Oh,
then,
good.
that would be a tickler.
And I
So-
think it does.
Yeah, so,
That's the stick, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the first question that they ask, and it's in the steps are in this 4-page thing. So on the back, where it says, based on the questions raised during our report to you all back in April, there are several things the city must do in order to become a FIPA. And so those 6 steps there are the things that we have to do. It's directly taken out of the document for agency designation procedures. And it's a much longer document, but this is essentially the snapshot from that.
So can
And so
you look at this and tell us, I mean, not right this moment, but I think we need to understand what the next steps are.
Yeah.
But I think your first step is simply to decide who you want to apply.
Well, that's what,
Is that what we're saying right now?
I
We
do.
do?
I would
I
like,
do.
and again, mainly because we don't have that EEOC presence, times have changed. Maybe we're at this point where we can get it here.
And what about asking at some point the county if they want to partner with us and just more broadly in this, with this office,
Sure.
given all the concerns we,
I think it's
Fundraising.
worth reaching out to them
It's worth
at the
doing
staff
it.
level. Just to advise
I
us.
think at the staff level right now, when you meet with
you want the staff to
Mr.
reach out to the
Richardson,
county?
I think
Just-
it's more
just to-
Mr. Murphy and Mr.
Just to
Richardson.
advise us on whether there's any interest, if there's
Okay.
not. I mean, no other, we would be the first, so we won't.
And one other question regarding the makeup of the commission. So some of our commissions actually specify some specific interests or skill sets or focus points. Just give some thought to, would that be valuable to help you really address some of these upcoming priorities that you see? If you have people who are specifically interested in X, Y, Z as identified, and people who know that who are applying, I just feel like right now, it just feels like it's more of a rolling of the dice.
The ordinance states that the commission would be diverse based on the protected activities
Yeah.
and the protected classes. So
We should
it's
probably-
already in there.
But we should make sure that we are addressing that. Like, do we have that representation in the commission? I don't know.
Well, because I think the application process is very general, then it might be helpful if in your process, that's the
We
question
flag and
used-
identify, are you a member of a
Yeah.
productive class? Yes. You're right, we have a very general application for everybody.
For
but
everybody.
Maybe there's a way that we can add an addendum for this specifically. Let's give it some thought. But for now, I mean, I think we need to repost that there's openings and that they need to be filled.
So I know we're closing down, but is it out of the realm for the commission? Are you all not interested in having some of the more authoritative power? Or I know we've heard from community members the HRC doesn't have any teeth, or they need to be able to have power to go and address these issues. Is that something that you all are interested in, or?
I
I know you
think
two
you
can't
need to be
speak.
specific about teeth, because what the commission is able to do is make recommendations to council.
To council, right.
So what do you mean by teeth?
So maybe fine, or have a power to maybe fine companies who you found have
That's,
done different
That's not
things.
our-
That's not something that we can do.
We can even have that
if someone,
authority.
for instance, through our current process,
Mhm.
if an individual files a complaint and it goes through investigation and it's found to be, that individual has found, the respondent has been found to have discriminated against the person filing the complaint, then the city attorney's office has the teeth
Mhm.
to address that issue for the city of Charlottesville.
Right. Are
Not
you all-
necessarily on behalf of that individual. So
Last-
we don't have any,
Got you. Last question for me. Are y'all interested in looking at the bigger scope of employers, rather, excuse me? I know right now.
This by default does it.
yeah, the FIPA.
With the
The
FIPA.
FIPA
That's
does.
the
Yeah, the
FIPA
FIPA
But
does it.
I mean, in the event that we hear something in terms of the FIPA, it's just not feasible for us.
Well, I think one step at a time.
We're limited by
Okay.
state
We're
law.
limited by
Yeah.
state law.
Unless
We
we do
can't
this.
do, unless we
Gotcha.
become a FIPA, we can't
Yeah, we
do
can't
large
do that.
Gotcha.
employers.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, we have a quorum because she has to read some
Oh,
statement, right? So
It's
sorry,
not-
it's
it's
nothing
not-
related to you at all. It's just for formality. Sorry. Thank you very much.
thank you very,
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you all.
Can I ask one real quick question? Just I was just wondering if the Human Rights commission, as part of the ordinance, the council's going to be doing its legislative package in November. And didn't know if you all, do you have some formal recommendations for the council to?
We could, we didn't, we
Okay.
thought we had missed the deadline, and so that's why,
So November will be when the council's going to consider its legislative agendas. So
oh,
if
okay.
you all do have some,
Yeah,
In the next 10 days would be great.
yeah.
Thank you, John.
So thank you. All right, so I would like to make a motion to amend the September 10th, 2018 City Council meeting minutes to reflect that Councilor Signer was driving to Washington DC when he called into the meeting.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Meeting adjourned.
We're adjourned.